when I was a kid, my family moved to a completely different country. We moved from the middle of America in Texas all the way to Lisbon, Portugal, a small country in this big city though, in the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, and they spoke a completely different language, not Spanish, but Portuguese. And Portuguese is a language that's complicated, it's Latin based, but it has all sorts of unique sounds, and I spoke none of it. And so I was thrown into a world and a culture, community, neighborhood where I didn't speak the language whatsoever. I just got on a plane and got off of it, and there I was immersed in Portuguese. And what happened is, as I spent time in the community, as I heard Portuguese spoken, I can remember realizing when I was fluent, I began having dreams in Portuguese. I began thinking in Portuguese, not thinking, oh, how do I say I want another glass of water or I'd like a cup of coffee. I began just thinking straight, this is what you say. And that's fluency. And so gospel fluency is being so immersed in the gospel, being surrounded by the truths of Jesus in such a way that we're not even interpreting, oh, how do I put this into good news language? We're just able to speak and interpret the world in light of the gospel. That would build up the church in love by speaking the truth about Jesus to one another. That's the whole aim and the picture of gospel fluency. And that's perhaps, if there is a secret sauce to missional communities, it's that they are environments where believers and disciples of Jesus can grow and be immersed in the gospel like that. That our communities would be incubators, basically, where everyone is speaking the gospel so much that it just gets translated into us to where we begin to dream in the good news about Jesus. And that we'd be able to just sort of speak it to every sort of situation of life. And that's one of the things that we struggle with in the church today, is responding to all of life's circumstances and all of our relationships with good news that applies to that. A lot of times we rely on the gospel to simply be an emergency get out of jail free card, get out of hell card, if you will. And so the good news only applies to what happens when you die. But the truth of Jesus affects every single part of our lives. And so gospel fluency is a key component into the life and the flourishing of every Christian community. A few words on what gospel fluency is not. It's not plowing over people and giving people quick answers about the gospel. Like I did when I was first learning Portuguese. I would memorize words and phrases and I would just say them to people all the time. But if they said anything back, or if the conversation went a different way, I was completely lost. Gospel fluency is actually listening and responding to the people around you, but being so sort of saturated in the good news of Jesus that we're able to interpret and respond accordingly. And so that's what gospel fluency is. How do you become gospel fluent? Well, you would have to be immersed in a place where that's being spoken all the time. You need a community. To be gospel fluent, you also need to practice. As I learned Portuguese, I had to say things wrong. And it was getting to that place of courage where I was able to say things wrong in the safe environment of my family or friends that I knew that I could trust to correct me gently and not shame me. That's when I really began to learn how to speak the language. And so we need not just a community, but a group of people that we can practice the gospel with. And then lastly, we need to actually learn and immerse ourselves in the good news ourselves. Part of learning a different language is to do some study. When I began to read the newspapers, honestly just the sports section and the cartoons as a kid, that I really began to grow in the gospel. And so we need to be reading the scriptures, we need to be in a community of people that's striving to learn at that, and we need our communities to be places where we can practice the gospel. And while we do have a resource that helps you get down the way, it's not as if you follow this resource, you will then end up being gospel fluent. But it is a really helpful start. We created a resource, Jeff Vanderstelt and Ben Connolly, called the Gospel Fluency Handbook. And it's designed for communities of people to spend 8 to 10 weeks really striving and being immersed in the gospel. It's filled with exercises, It's filled with personal opportunities to grow and read the scriptures. It's filled with discussion questions. There's videos that go along with it. And there's exercises where you begin to practice and fail, but also practice and grow. And so the Gospel Fluency Handbook is sort of the best sort of incubator environment to grow in speaking the truths of Jesus and the everyday stuff of life. You can find other resources on Gospel Fluency at gospelfluency.com, as well as finding a variety of different articles and podcasts at saturatetheworld.com.